right, should we bring the meeting to order? Clerk, can I call the roll?
Yes, I'd like to call roll. Councilmember Du Bois.
Here.
Councilmember Koo. Here. Councilmember Niss. Chair Wolbach.
Here.
3 present.
So our first item is an audit of green purchasing practices. I'll turn it over to the auditor. Staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Harriet Richardson, City Auditor, here to present the audit of green purchasing practices. With me is Lisa Wahara, who worked on this audit. So we wanted to start off with a couple of positive things on the green purchasing activities and their accomplishments before we get into what the audit found. So right here is a list of things that they've accomplished, just a couple of them. They've created a flow chart to help them with decision-making on green products. They've written some performance specifications. They have incorporated contract terms and conditions regarding vendor responsibilities for waste reduction and pollution prevention. They've developed a sustainable procurement playbook for cities. They were a participant in developing that. And the city also received a Green California Leadership Award in 2010. There's more detail in the audit report. Page 13 of your packet has a more complete list of the accomplishments. So the objective of this audit was to determine whether or not whether the city of Palo Alto complies with applicable green purchasing requirements in its purchases. In Palo Alto, green purchasing includes areas such as goods and services, energy and gas purchases, green building materials, and use of pesticides. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk a little bit about what she did and what she found during the audit.
Lisa Uehara, Performance Auditor 2, and the audit focused on the city's purchases of office supplies, cleaning supplies, and computers to assess whether purchases complied with the city's green purchasing policies, mostly during the period of July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2016. And the audit shows that the city's green purchasing policies and goals were not fully achieved, primarily because there are no consolidated formal written procedures to implement the environmentally preferred purchasing policy, which is also known as the green purchasing policy. There are other procedures not updated, and there is a lack of awareness of policies and procedures. There's also a lack of a clear governance structure that clearly defines who is responsible for implementing various components of the green purchasing policy. The city does not have adequate technical tools to track green purchases. Some examples of what we found. All of the $1 million in computers, notebooks, and monitors that the city purchased were Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool, or EPEAT, certified. And in May 2016, the city received the 2016 EPEAT Sustainable Purchasing Award, which recognizes excellence in sustainable electronics procurement. Only 59% of Staples paper products purchases and only 19% of paper product purchases from other office supply vendors met or most likely met the recycled content requirement. The city purchased and distributed drinking water in plastic bottles, which is against policy. Staff had identified this issue and took corrective action during the audit. We also found that the city's janitorial contractor that services most city facilities did not always use green products or provide reports of bulk chemicals as defined by the contract, nor did the city monitor the products to ensure they were green. Public Works has not formally documented its assessment of the suitability of battery electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles during its review of the fleet replacement capital improvement plan in the annual budget process. So we have some key recommendations up on the screen. The audit report includes 8 recommendations, including the city manager's office should clearly define the departments responsible for implementing green purchasing policies, determine if additional staffing and funding is needed to implement the policies, and provide the responsible departments with the authority to implement green purchasing across the city. The responsible department should then consult with the attorney's office to align the municipal code as needed with green purchasing policies. should write and distribute consolidated procedures to implement green purchasing policies, including the 10 different areas in the environmentally preferred purchasing policy, and update existing policies and procedures to reflect current requirements, including recycled paper and procurement card guidance. Also, the responsible department should then evaluate if the new e-procurement system and proposed enterprise resource planning system or other specialized software can help with tracking and reporting green purchases. And then as part of the planned transition of the annual performance report to the city manager's office, determine what green purchasing performance measures to track and report, such as the number and percentage of green products purchased and their environmental benefits. The Sustainable Procurement Playbook for cities provides potential criteria for what to track. And also, the city manager's office and the department's Public Works, Administrative Services, and the Office of Sustainability agreed with all recommendations in our report and specified their corrective action plan in Appendix 2, which should be on page 30 of the packet.
Yeah, I want to also point out that you have an App Places memo in front of you regarding this audit. So subsequent to the audit, one of the vendors that we looked at information from revised information on its website. So on your packet, page 19, the first paragraph says that cleaning supplies and paper products were not monitored to ensure they were green. It states that about 7,600 ounces of the non-bulk cleaning chemicals and floor care products that the contractor used were not green sealed certified. That should say now 6,300 ounces, which is 73% instead of 88%. And then we also forgot to label Appendix 2 as Appendix 2, so the city manager's response beginning on packet page 30 should be labeled as Appendix 2. That completes our presentation, and we are ready to answer any questions you have.
I'll turn it over to my colleagues,
Yeah.
Tom or Lydia.
And also, we have representatives from several departments here available for questions.
Excellent. Tom or Lydia, would you like to kick us off on questions?
So does all the city's purchasing go through the purchasing department?
This is David Ramberg, Assistant Director, Administrative Services Department. So the purchasing division is within the Administrative Services Department, and we are a centralized purchasing operation for the city. So all purchases do make their way through the purchasing division, except for purchases that are made on P-card. Those are made at purchase card, Visa purchase card. Those are made by the individual purchasers in departments, up to a level of a maximum of $10,000 per
Okay.
purchase.
Thanks. I was just wondering in terms of awareness, if the purchasing department could kind of make people aware of the policy and also kind of enforce it, I guess.
So we can. Our primary, and we do. I think part of what this audit brings forward is possibly a more centralized effort for making the green purchase requirements prevalent throughout the city. What our primary mission in the purchasing division is to make sure that we're accomplishing the procurement of goods and services in a timely manner to ensure that departments have the contracts to provide the services that they need to the community. So we are operating to try to be as efficient as possible to put contracts in place. So where we can and where we work in collaboration with the rest of the sustainability team here at the city, we build in the green requirements as we can into the contracts that have them appropriate. I think what this audit points to is a better dissemination of the green purchasing requirements throughout all aspects of the purchases that go on throughout the city. So that can be at the P-card level for those individual purchasers who make purchases up to $10,000. It can be through the contracting process. It can be in the RFP process. It can be in the specification process for when contracts are being put together at the department level.
Okay.
If I just might add to that, I think David hit this well. At the same time, I mean, the procurement department really needs to be something of a safety net because a lot of the specs are developed in the department. So we've got to make sure people are thinking about it at that level also. It's a lot to expect that everyone in purchasing would be sort of expert in the environmental standards that we want to pursue. So it is distributed.
And the policy it's a preferred policy, right? Not a requirement. Is there, situations where either for cost or speed that you would not make the environmental purchase?
I'm Julie Weiss. I'm in our Public Works Watershed Protection Program. And in the policy itself, the green purchasing policy itself, it doesn't state that certain things are required, but we have a number of other policies that the city has adopted that say it is required. For example, we have a mercury and dioxin reduction policy that said we need to purchase certain types of lighting and paper that have less chemicals in them that we are concerned about that we see in San Francisco Bay. We have a less toxic pest management policy that says we're going to be doing things to purchase less toxic pesticides. So we have and we have other policies like that. So we have other policies that are attached to and relevant to the green purchasing policy.
So one thing I'd like to point out that I think Julie's the one who did this. They've tried to pull together a lot of those policies on the city's intranet more recently because they were kind of scattered. And so I think it may be clearer in the future to people what all those policies are because they are grouped together now. But there are quite a few separate policies.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the audit.
Lydia?
I'm new to all this, so the P card, can you give me a little bit more understanding of what it does, and is it the holder up to 10,000 can order anything, or does it go through the procurement department? How does that work?
Right. So a little history. We've had a purchase card. We used to be on the Cal Card program, which was a state program through the state of California. It was called the Cal Card. About 5 years ago, we wanted to update our system so that we could have an online review of activity. And so we switched over to a modern purchase card system through JP Morgan Chase. And part of that purchase card program, and they're one of the leading providers of corporate purchase cards in the country, and they have a massive system, and we're able to get rebates, a rebate revenue as well. So we get something in the neighborhood of about $60,000 a year in terms of rebate revenue based on our spend. We have about $6 to $7 million in spend right now on P card. That's all what we call very small purchases. Okay, certainly under 10,000. Very few even get close to 10,000. These are a very typical purchase card purchase is buying office supplies through our Staples contract. So we have a contract with Staples for office supplies, and they're supposed to provide us office supplies at a very competitive rate that we've contracted for. And we make all of our purchases from Staples on purchase cards, on Visa purchase cards. So that's a classic example of how we use our P card.
So what kind of products what goes to the procurement department? I mean, does the purchaser on the P card check with the procurement department or the inventory list before they go out purchasing more? I mean, just how does it work?
That's a good question. So the municipal code allows for small dollar purchases under $10,000 to be purchased by individuals without a solicitation. So that means those do not need to go through the procurement department because there is no solicitation required. But in many cases, the P card is buying items that have already been contracted for at a contracted low price. So in the case of office supplies, we have a contract with Staples that is competitively bid for low price office supplies compared to competitors, and we make all the purchases on the P card. So that's That's one example. But if an individual has an urgent need in a department, let's say in the community services department, and it's a summer camp and they need to go out and buy water, it's a very hot day, they can go down to the local store and buy water or buy whatever else is needed on their P card, and there would be no issues with that. It would be a small purchase and it would be appropriate for business use. Yep.
Any other questions? I didn't have any additional questions beyond that. Does anyone want to offer a motion?
Make a motion that we accept the audit of green purchasing practices. Though I don't know if, did you want to say something?
Gil?
Yeah, Councilmember Gil Friend, Chief Sustainability Officer. I just wanted to add an additional response to your question about whether this is a preferred policy or required policy. The way the policy was originally written, it encourages us to buy greener products where feasible or where not too expensive and so forth. And this is a fairly typical approach for most cities. A year ago, city manager suggested to the staff or directed the staff to default to green. In other words, to reverse the priority and say, let's buy the greener product as the basic assumption, except where it is not feasible, not practical, doesn't meet service requirements, or is too expensive. So it's a subtle change, but it directs us to look in a different direction as we implement.
So I think you were trying your hand at a motion. You want to go finish it up and see if there's a second? All right, we have a motion by Councilmember Du Bois, second by Councilmember Koo. Anything you'd like to say, speaking to the motion or the second? All right, all in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously with Councilmember Niss absent. Thank you very much for that one.
Thank you.
And it looks like you're still on the docket, Harriet, for the next
I'm on
all evening.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on to, thank you everybody for that one. And as people get resettled, our next one also is another audit, the continuous monitoring audits payments, item 2 on tonight's agenda.
Okay. So this is our audit of continuous monitoring of payments. So to start, it's probably helpful for me to define the term continuous monitoring, which is a process for proactively reviewing data or information at regular intervals, often through an automated process that uses some sort of data analytics software. And it helps identify errors or erroneous information or incomplete data or information in records. In this audit, we use data analytics software to see if it would help the city identify duplicate payment, vendor payments, or vendor records, which can increase the risk for duplicate or fraudulent payments. It's also important to note that monitoring is one of 5 components of an effective internal control system, which are the processes that an organization implements to provide reasonable assurance that it will achieve its operational, reporting, and compliance objectives. So there really is an expectation to be monitoring what you're doing and taking corrective action as necessary. So the audit had 2 findings. The first one is that implementing a continuous monitoring process can help the city identify duplicate invoice payment and vendor records. And I want to give you a little bit of background on the process we went through, because there was an article in Palo Alto Online, which I think slightly misstated what we actually found, so I want to make sure that it's understood tonight how we actually approached it and what we actually found. So we started by identifying invoices that had the same invoice amount and invoice number, which identified about 1,400 potential duplicate payments out of the 44,000 invoices that the city paid from July 2013 through October 2015. We eliminated what's called a false positive, which are the records that the data analytics software identifies as potential duplicate payments, but that we could confirm were not actually duplicate payments through some other piece of information. So by starting with the same invoice number and same amount, we might realize, oh, there's a different date on them, or it's a different vendor, or it's a vendor that bills on a monthly basis and it's a set amount, and so it's not a duplicate payment. So we eliminated all of those, and by doing that, we narrowed the potential duplicate payments down to 295, which we sorted into about 174 invoice groups, meaning that you had your original payment, your duplicate payment, and in some cases, there was more than one duplicate payment on the same invoice. So those totaled about $820,000, and that's where the number that was in the news article came from. Of those 174, we randomly selected 113 of the invoice groups, and we confirmed that the city had made 24 duplicate payments for a total of $57,000. In working with ASD, we confirmed that the city had recovered 17 of those 24 payments, totaling $55,000 of the $57,000 prior to the audit. And ASD is here tonight. Again, they'll be able to address later the work they've done since the audit to address the remaining duplicate payments, as well as the ones that we didn't look at through our audit sample. Our second finding, because of some of the duplicate payments were the result of having more than one record in our SAP system for the same vendor, we did additional work on the vendor master file, which led to our second finding that there's numerous vendor records in SAP that increase the risk of inappropriate and erroneous payments, as well as incorrect tax reporting. So we again used the data analytics software to identify duplicate vendor records, but we also found by doing that the majority of the vendor records aren't even used anymore. So out of the 43,600 or so active vendor records in SAP, almost 41,000 hadn't been used since before 2015, and about 36,000 hadn't been used since before 2012. We also identified several errors in the vendor records, which increased the risk of incorrect tax reporting, including making payments to different addresses for the same vendors, an incomplete or inaccurately formatted vendor identification number. We identified one instance where this caused the city to underreport $30,000 of reportable payments for a vendor to the IRS. One of the main reasons for having duplicate vendor records is that the city used to create two records for a vendor when they determined that some income was reportable to the IRS and some of it was not, and they would make one payment under one vendor number and one under the other. Since that time, more recently, ASD's corrected that practice, recognizing that it's up to the vendor to determine what they report to the IRS and not up to us. So since that change, that should reduce the creation of the duplicate vendor records in the future. The audit includes 7 recommendations, including building a continuous monitoring reporting process into the new enterprise resource planning system to search for potential duplicate vendor payments and vendor records at regular intervals. We recommended updating policies and procedures regarding how to correct duplicate payments and what is needed to create a complete and accurate vendor master record. We also recommended that they reviewed the 121 duplicate invoice payment groups that we did not review, and that they clean the city's vendor master file before the records get transferred into the new ERP system once that is implemented. The city manager's office agreed with 6 of the recommendations and partially agreed with 1 of the recommendations. And that completes our presentation on that audit. And I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Harriet, and I'll turn back to my colleagues. Lydia and Tom, do you have any questions you want to start with? Lydia, go ahead.
Harriet, can you tell me why the manager's office partially went with that last one that you said?
Yes, so that recommendation had to do with requiring vendors to use unique invoice numbers, and they said that they can't direct vendors what to do as far as how they number their invoices. We did find some policies and procedures at other jurisdictions where they actually do require that. I'm not quite sure how they get around that. Maybe they just don't do business with someone who won't comply with what their organization needs, but it really had to do with how the organization submits their invoices.
So is there a discussion of a resolution for that?
We have not had additional discussion about that since the audit.
Tom?
So, yeah, just to pick up on that, so is that the primary reason we get duplicates? Because the invoice numbers aren't unique?
That's one of the reasons. Invoice number's not unique. Some of it was that sometimes they would submit a duplicate invoice and we'd pay both of them. Sometimes an invoice would get paid. It would be paid because it was submitted from an electronic copy and a paper copy. There were various reasons why we got duplicate payments. So I think having a system where you can check on it regularly. Right now, we have, they rely somewhat on the vendors to say, you paid us twice, we'll give you a credit, or something like that. But having a proactive process is really the best approach to identifying those, rather than relying on the manual systems that they currently rely on to identify those.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, when you make a payment, don't you make it against an invoice? So,
Sometimes a vendor will submit a second invoice for the same
with a
item.
different number?
It may have the same number. That's originally how we identified it. They had the same number, the same invoice number. There may be some other payments that, where there were no invoice numbers, and so we couldn't match them up, but the ones that we identified had the same invoice number.
So it sounds like the total dollar amount was relatively low?
In the end, it ended up being relatively low.
Okay. And what's the status of the new ERP system?
So they are planning to issue an RFP. They have finished identifying the technical requirements, and the last I heard, they were in the process of confirming those with departments. They were having meetings, and they are planning to issue an RFP late summer timeframe or so, somewhere around there, August, September.
Okay.
It's going to be a staged implementation process, and I don't know that they've gotten to the point of figuring all of that out yet.
So if we just look at the recommendations, I guess, in the back, I guess are all of your recommendations here going to be worked on?
Yes. They agreed with all of them. They've given us an action plan on all of them, except recommendation 1.2 is the one that they partially agreed with, but they actually gave us an implementation plan for how they will attempt to approach that.
Okay. And since you've stayed, do you want to add anything or make any comments?
Yeah, I want to.
Oh, and if you could just identify yourself again for the
Yeah,
record.
no problem.
Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. David Ramberg, Assistant Director of the Administrative Services Department. We oversee the Accounts Payable Division. And for what were a couple comments. One, as you guys know, we run the SAP system here for the city's enterprise resource planning system. We have the system is currently configured to identify when there might be an invoice that has the same number on it, the question you were just asking. And it's currently not a hard stop on the system, meaning it can be overridden. And in some of these instances that were found as duplicates, we had human error that had improperly overridden an invoice, creating a duplicate invoices. In many of the instances where a duplicate was created, we caught it later on in the process before it was issued as payment. What we are doing now with SAP is, within our current ability to configure SAP without any additional cost, we can put in a hard stop rather than a staff override. So that hard stop, what that will do is it'll prevent that one individual. We only have 3 people that do this for the whole city, so we can't have perfect segregation of duties. But what we can do is we can create a hard stop, and this is what we're configuring right now. And so probably the next update that we come back with you on this, we'll have this done because it's in testing right now, where a second, probably a supervisor, will come over and review that hard stop and have to give it an approval for it to go to the next stage. And so we'll have a separate set of eyes on that potential duplicate that the system would flag.
And maybe it's not in SAP, but it'd be in the new system. When that invoice comes up, does it show payments made against the invoice?
There is a payment history for the vendor, yes. And so, and there would be, I haven't seen the screen myself, but there I would presume there, depending on which, one of the issues with SAPs, there's lots of levels, and so you have to dig down sometimes to get to the relevant information. And in this case, I don't know, Harriet, if you guys know offhand, but I think depending on what screen you're at, you can certainly get to additional payment information, but it may not be at that exact screen where you're seeing, you know, the possible duplicate. That part I don't know right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. We had to extract things from, that would appear on different screens to actually see the duplicate payments.
Right.
And
Sounds about right.
and so I assume P cards are, there's an expense report filed after the fact? And
Correct. So the purchase card is actually in a separate system. The high-level dollar amounts come over into SAP so that every department knows how much they spend, because SAP is our final repository of all spending activity. But for the P-card system, the detailed spend activity is in the JP Morgan cloud-based hosted solution. I don't think we found any duplicates there, because that's.
that was my question.
Yeah.
This audit covered those payments?
Yeah, those are, you know, very much locked down on the Visa network. And I think it's, you know, it'd be very hard to duplicate those. But in terms of review of those transactions, I didn't cover this before, so this is probably salient. There's the purchase card holder, which is a staff person. This purchase card holder has a supervisor. So all the transactions of a purchase card holder are reviewed every month by a supervisor and approved to accounts payable. Accounts payable then looks at all transactions across the city and selects a population to audit every month. And they audit transactions for appropriateness, and for other adherence to policies and procedures, sometimes around travel, sometimes around the appropriateness of other purchases, including green purchases. And sometimes we'll flag, if we find something that's out of policy, we'll flag that and we'll bring that to the attention of the card holder, and we'll have corrective action if needed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last question, I mean, there are a lot of inactive vendors in the system. So is there an idea with the new ERP system, maybe have the system automatically deactivate a vendor if they're not used for a number of years? Because it seems like it would, you know, build up over time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think Harriet cited some figures about how old our vendor database is, and the majority of them are quite old, prior to 2012. And the reason for that is that we did not do a cleaning of our vendor database prior to bringing our vendor database into SAP. So our prior legacy system was something called IFAS back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then when we went to SAP, and I think in about 2003 or 4, we just brought over all of those vendors. That's not good practice. We should have cleaned and cleansed the data more. And that's the biggest reason for that large percentage. They've just been carried over. But I think exactly in the new system, what we want to do, a better practice of course, is scrubbing, only bringing over active vendors, the ones that are actually part of active contracts, or have had payments, let's say, in the past, 1 to 2 years or something like that, and coming up with a criteria, and then running some data tools against it to make sure that the vendor database is clean, and then bringing over only 2,000 to 3,000. I think that's what our current list of active vendors is.
Yeah, so I mean, that seems like a big part of it, but then also, just a comment, if you could put in that automatic cleaning rule kind of going forward, so not only do you clean it once, but if you had some policy that a vendor deactivates if they're not used in 2 years. And,
That's a really good point. Yeah.
so, okay, thank you.
Lydia?
Just so I'm clear, When you transfer all the old vendors, it's still into the SAP system? Or
Correct.
is it the what is it, the ERP, SAP?
SAP is an ERP.
SAP is an ERP, correct.
SAP is in the ERP.
It is an ERP,
It's the
Enterprise
brand.
Resource Planning System.
Okay.
And SAP is a vendor.
Yeah, and SAP is the vendor, yes.
I
And-
got it.
yes, yes. But the city is in the process of planning a new replacement financial system that would be our enterprise resource planning system. So when we talk about the new ERP system, we're talking about something that is currently in the planning stages that would replace SAP.
Great. Well, once again, you two have asked great questions, and I don't have any questions that I think would be useful to add at this point, so I'll ask if anyone wants to make a motion.
I'll make the motion to recommend that the city council accept the continuous monitoring audit for payments.
I'll second that. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I think it's all said. Thank you.
Likewise. Okay. All in favor? Aye. That passes unanimously with Councilmember Niss absent. Thank you very much. And for item three, again, Harriet, convenient that we have you here. The item 3 for tonight's agenda is Auditor's Office Quarterly Report as of March 31st, 2017. And Harriet, once more.
Thank you, yes, and I don't have a PowerPoint on this one. This is our quarterly report for the third quarter of fiscal year 17, ending in March. And three activity highlights for the quarter. We published the 2016 Performance Report, National Citizen Survey, and Citizen-Centric Report, and presented those to the council at their annual retreat on January 28th. We also presented the Community Services Department fee schedule audit to the Policy and Services Committee, and that was on February 14th. And on February 14th, we also discussed at Policy and Services the proposed changes to the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Hotline protocols. So during this quarter, we completed 2 additional audits, the 2 that we presented tonight, the continuous monitoring of payments and the green purchasing audit, and as I mentioned, the fee schedules audit. We have several other audits in progress. One is the utilities water billing and accuracy audit. That one is in the report is being drafted at this point. That says in this report, I say that we expect to present that at the June Policy and Services Committee meeting. As of today, it looks like we'll publish it before the end of June, but it will probably be presented at the August meeting. There's some juggling going on of some things right now. The continuous monitoring, another continuous monitoring audit, this one is of overtime, to look at whether or not a continuous monitoring process for overtime could improve the city's oversight and management of overtime. That one is also being drafted right now, and it is scheduled to be presented at the June Policy and Services Committee meeting. We're also doing an audit of the Hydromax cross-bore contract. That was to evaluate the work performed under a contract to see if the city took an appropriate approach to the work, including whether it received appropriate inspection data from the effort and allocated an appropriate level of oversight over that contractor. That audit is also being drafted right now. It's almost completed and is scheduled for the June Policy and Services Committee meeting. So we also have been doing what we call a non-audit service on the Enterprise Resource Planning Project. And this is really, it's an advisory service that we're doing where we're attending meetings, looking at what they're finding as far as the requirements, their approach to planning the RFP, and then providing technical advice to them based on what we see. The main purpose of this is to identify issues up front so that we don't come back, 3 years later and say, oh, you should have done this, instead being more proactive in preventing things. So during this quarter, one of my auditors attended 27 system requirement validation sessions. So those were meetings with individual departments where the consultant went over what they identified as the requirements for that specific department. And then she also attended 3 strategic and tactical team meetings and provided verbal advice during those meetings. We also issued a memo to the IT director that discusses what's going well with the project and some of the challenges we identified. And I'm in the process of scheduling a meeting with him now so that we can discuss that memo in more detail. So each quarter, we're planning to issue a memo letting him know what we're seeing, what we're finding as he goes, so that he can make some changes along the way and not end up with a failed project, which is common with government ERP systems. And I already mentioned that we completed the National Citizen Survey and Annual Performance Report. So throughout the year, we monitor the city's sales tax revenues, and we look for businesses that we have access to a database that allows us to see where there's changes in what a business has reported as their sales tax to the city, or if there's a new business and we aren't seeing sales tax reported, so that we can report to the State Board of Equalization, and they can look at that and say, did they underreport, or did they misallocate their sales tax to another jurisdiction, which is sometimes common when they do business in more than one jurisdiction. So during the third quarter, our office recovered about just about $3,000 in sales tax from our increase, and we also contract with a consultant who recovered $852. Year-to-date, we've recovered a total of $277,000. There are quite a few requests out to the State Board of Equalization right now, 69 waiting to be researched and processed. 26 of those are from our office and 43 are from the vendor. At the end of June, we received sales tax information for the Stanford Hospital project, and we'll report the information about what the city recovered under the special agreement we have for the city to get the sales tax on that project. We publish the quarterly reports on our city website, on the city auditor website, and I have a link there to that. We also participate in several advisory roles. We serve as an advisor on the Utilities Risk Oversight Committee, the Information Security Steering Committee, and the Information Technology Governance Review Board. And as I already mentioned, we're also doing providing advisory services on the ERP system. So that completes the main part of the work that we've done this past quarter. We are getting ready, because we have several audits wrapping up, we are getting ready to start some new audits that are on our audit plan, and so those will be listed on the next quarterly report. So the status of audit recommendations, in 2014, the council changed the way we do that. So it used to be that our office would ask the departments to provide us the status of their recommendations, and we would report to the council on that. And in 2014, the council decided that they wanted the departments to report directly and more often than once a year, which is what we were doing. So we still track what's outstanding. We have 9 audits on this list. The last one, the Community Services Fee Schedule Audit, is not past due. The others are all past due. As you can see, the oldest one from 2010 has 2 open recommendations. Some of those others have not been reported on at all. The workers' disability rates and workers' compensation and the cable franchise and PEG fees audits have not had any reports. The other ones are all past due. In mid-March, we sent an email to all of the departments that are affected by these audits, saying that we need to start getting these going again. And so we're starting to get the responses to those, and my staff is validating the responses so that we can say to the council when the departments present them, yes, we agree with the status that they've reported. In some cases, we're going back for more information, but you should start seeing those coming to policy and services, probably August, September, on those agendas. So I think from what I'm hearing from my staff, we're probably going to be able to clear out quite a few of these in the next few months. And then the hotline is the last thing on our report. So we received and closed 2 hotline complaints during the third quarter, one of which was related to a previous case. So at this point, we have no open hotline cases. They have all been closed. The 2 that came in during this quarter, both were unsubstantiated. And I mentioned in here about the survey that we sent to other jurisdictions, and that I had presented that as a discussion item at the March Policy and Services Committee meeting. So that's all I have on that, and I'm open for questions.
Any questions? Tom?
So you don't have any audits right now in kind of the design or early collection
We
phase?
we are just getting ready. I'm going to send out an audit notice on the code enforcement audit this week. So we are doing a little bit of work to get that one ready to start. So, and then these ones that are wrapping up, I'm going to have 3 auditors ready to start new audits in the next couple of weeks. So we are going to start on those ERP audits that we have planned.
So what are the new ones?
So code enforcement is definitely, that one she's already doing a little bit of work, but we haven't sent out the audit start letter yet. And then we have 3 ERP planning audits. So one is data reliability, which kind of goes back to the issue, for example, of the vendor master file. That's one example, but what we're going to do is look at a variety of data sets that are in the SAP system and see where cleanup needs to be done before data gets transferred over into the new system. We've got one that we're calling segregation of duties. That's audit jargon for when 2 people shouldn't do the same, have the ability, one person shouldn't have the ability to do too many tasks that could allow them to do bad things like commit fraud. And so looking at how the system is set up to make sure that they have the right separation of duties so that we can make sure that the city's protected. And the third one is governance, IT governance. And that's really looking at, as an example, right now when we do an audit and we want a data set and we go to a department and we ask for information about the data that they use, for example, say in utilities, what data goes into making a utilities bill? And they will say, oh, I don't know, go ask IT. And IT will say, no, go check with the department. The department is the data owner, but a lot of times they have not had the training or they don't have the knowledge to know what goes on behind the screen that they see. And so really looking at what that structure should be and what kind of training those people should get so that they know what their responsibilities are, and that it reduces the chance for error when people know how the system works and how their reports are developed. And so really focusing a lot on that
Okay.
kind of thing.
I think in past years, you've sent around a list of potential audits for prioritization. I mean, are we kind of at that time? It sounds like.
We're getting close to that time, so I will probably be bringing a list at the first Policy and Services Committee meeting after, so I'll be sending an email out in the near future.
Okay.
I can probably do that. I can probably send that out next week
I
and
think
get
you've sent
that
it
going.
to the whole council.
I
right?
do,
Yeah.
I do.
Okay. On the National Citizen Survey, you did present at the retreat. We didn't really have a lot of time to talk about it. Did you feel like you covered everything you wanted to cover?
I think so. I think one thing that really came out pretty clearly on that from the questions that were asked was that there are certain areas that continuously rate low, like the built environment, but that question is fairly broad. And so this year, what we're going to do, I've already talked to the planning director and the community services director. We're going to sit down and develop some custom questions that will try and dig down deeper into what it is that causes people to think that the built environment is low. So we're going to try and focus on just a couple of areas, most of them tied directly to the council priorities, and develop our custom questions around those areas this year.
Yes, I don't know what you guys think. I mean, we might want to have a study session to actually talk about the survey a little bit deeper. I didn't really feel like we had a chance.
Are you thinking something for policy and services or for the
No,
council?
I
as
meant
well?
for the council, like a short study session at council.
Well, maybe that's something we can
Yeah.
bring up with Jim, and I mean, I'm not sure it's exactly this agenda item right now, but I think we can definitely, as individuals, ask Jim, and I'm sure staff here will mention it, and I'd be comfortable with that.
Just going on to sales tax. So we had the vendor collect $800. I'm just curious how much we paid the vendor to do that.
So we pay a percentage of what they collect, so
Okay.
we pay 20%. But I think it's also important to remember that although that was a small amount, they have quite a number of requests out to the state. They have 43 requests out to the state waiting to be processed. And when you look at that large $277,000 number that we've collected year to date, most of that was from the vendor.
Right.
So,
So I think the last couple of times it's been very low, and we keep hearing it's delayed at the state. I mean, is there anything we can do to unjam that?
I don't think so. It's based on their staffing. And I'm looking at right now, so we have 69 outstanding, inquiries outstanding right now. A year ago, we had 56 at this time. The year before that, we had 43. So that backlog
Yeah.
seems to be growing.
And 277,000 sounds like a large number, but my recollection is it's usually like over $1 million. It's quite large.
Not
right?
the part that we actually recover on the
Okay.
misallocations.
I thought there had been years where we've covered quite a bit.
No, actually, I have a chart here that I've started looking, trying to track, going back to 2007. And the highest year, actually, this 277 puts us at the highest year, and that was due to one really large recovery effort. Prior to that, the largest amount was 169,000, and that was in 2014.
Okay, all right, I stand corrected.
Yeah, we've had it as low as 24,000, and that was 2011.
Okay. And then I think I brought this up last time. It looks like the sales tax reports on the website are still like the most current ones, like June of 2016.
There should be 2 more since then. I'll have to look. I know we have one pending that needs to go on the website, and that should be going out. It's done, it just needs to be
Yeah.
posted.
So if you could just check on that, it just looks really
Okay.
out of date. And then, we do this every quarter, I guess. It comes back and, we haven't had any implemented recommendations for a long time. You're saying next time we're going to see a bunch.
I think you'll start seeing some because we do have those emails out, and we have started receiving responses to them.
So I'd like to make a request that next time this comes back, maybe, could you provide more detail on these 76 items?
What they recommend?
And
Okay.
maybe even just attach a table of what they are.
Okay.
And if there's a status of, either fixed or decided we're never going to fix it, or it's still outstanding, I think that would be really useful. And some of these are quite old, right?
Right. I
2010.
think most of the ones that are here are ones that will be implemented. I have worked primarily with ASD on some of these where the recommendations, went back and looked at them and said they aren't really feasible at this point, or they don't make sense
Yeah.
anymore due to other operational changes.
So it'd be really nice just to see that clearly, and we could
Okay.
maybe clear some of these out that are so old.
I'm also trying to work more closely with departments to make sure that when we make the recommendations up front, that they make sense.
Yeah. Great. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Lydia, quick question, go for it.
Harriet, so do you know the food trucks, how are the sales tax collected on those? They move all around.
That's a good question. I
just-
don't know. I would have to check on that.
I always wondered, so I thought.
Okay, I'll move the staff recommendation that we recommend to the City Council acceptance of the Auditor's Office quarterly report as of March 31st, 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to propose that we make it very soft. Maybe we suggest that there's a study session on the National Citizen Survey as part of the acceptance.
I'm not sure it's really apropos for this particular motion, but I'm happy to have us discuss it and,
Yeah, I'm not saying that we do it. I'm saying that we ask staff to consider doing it, basically.
right, what I'm saying is, I think that
I
there are other
I
avenues
think
to
we're
get them.
accepting the National Citizen Survey, and so it's up to us to say if we accept it or if we want to discuss it.
Actually, let me look to
Yeah.
staff for any thoughts on
And
that.
I'm not certain how that works. I'd probably have to defer to the clerk or the city attorney.
And City Attorney, do you think there's anything wrong with adding that to this motion from a legal standpoint?
I think we're fine, but it would be a soft recommendation that we seek to put it on the council's calendar for further discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be fine with that amendment. So it'll be to recommend that the City Council accept the Auditor's Office quarterly report as of March 31st, 2017, and also recommend scheduling a full council study session regarding the National Citizen Survey.
Great, thanks.
Any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, passes unanimously with Councilmember Niss absent. All right, thank you very much, Harriet.
Thank you.
And I don't know if you want to stick around for our exciting last item, which is discussing future meetings and agendas. I think, did we all receive places? I think we all did kind of actually it's titled Tentative Future Items. A couple of things here, and I'll look to the city clerk for thoughts on this as well, though we may not be able to resolve it today. The date that's currently tentatively scheduled for our next meeting, May 23rd, is going to be a very difficult meeting time for staff. I understand that that is a budget meeting for the Finance Committee. I think it's the budget wrap-up, which means that Jim and probably a lot of his staff will have a really difficult time making that meeting for us. And so if there's a chance that we could reschedule that, possibly for Wednesday, the 24th, or some other time, I'm happy to look at our calendars right now and/or have the city clerk pull for a date.
We can handle it both ways, whatever you'd prefer. I'm happy to doodle, or if we can find a date and time now, we can do it that way as well.
Why don't we look at it tentatively? Lydia, I can't. On the 24th?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's tentatively do that and maybe send around a doodle just to confirm and check with Councilmember Niss as well.
Okay.
But I'm fine with, currently rescheduling that for
Okay,
the
great.
24th.
And then as for the start time on that day, do we keep it at 7?
I think there's a lot happening there, so that's the other question. I was wondering if you guys would be okay with starting as early as 6 or even 5 or
Okay.
5:30. But that might be,
I have them all on my calendar at 6. I thought that's when we normally started.
yeah,
When I send out the doodle, I can put both times if you'd like. You can
Okay.
put 6 and 7 and see everybody's availability.
I was going to
or-
suggest actually a little bit early, even at 5:30, if you guys can make it.
Okay.
But any thoughts on that?
6 is best for me.
Okay, let's do it at 6 then.
6 o'clock.
That will be probably a busy meeting. And just wanted to point out, one of the tentative items that would be led by the city manager's office would be airplane noise. I just wanted to speak to that briefly. I've spoken with the mayor and also with the city manager, and I think there's a lot of interest in the community and, among the city organization on having some council discussion, particularly around whether and how to provide additional feedback to our federal representatives and the FAA about the recommendations which they are currently studying. And so, I discussed with the mayor and also with the city manager and with Kash Ali what, if we wanted to do that as a city. I think everybody agreed that that would be a good idea to at least consider. And so the question was raised, well, what would be the best avenue for having that conversation? And the recommendation I heard and I thought was also okay was to do it here at Policy and Services. So unless there's any objection, that's kind of the gist of where we'd be heading with that. So it'd be an opportunity for members of the public to come and talk about that issue in the new context that we're dealing with the FAA, looking at those current recommendations and updating and clarifying our city's position in light of that upcoming FAA report.
It's going to be before the FAA response?
Right. So that would be the idea, is that as the FAA is looking at I think it's 108 recommendations, some from the Select Committee, some from the SFO Roundtable, they would have the benefit potentially of having an updated message from Palo Alto about what our priorities are among those recommendations or any clarity among them. In the absence of an updated city policy, there's been some confusion and maybe even misinformation out there about what Palo Alto's priorities are. But we could, since it's not agendized, I don't want to have too long a discussion about it tonight, just so you guys have
Wanted
insight
to make
on
sure
what that
that
would be about.
will the city manager also have information on how we can be part of the ad hoc committee at that policy and services when he comes back? Because I think that's an important discussion to have.
I think that the future of an ad hoc committee, whether it happens, when it happens, and how we could be part of it, is definitely an important part of that discussion. And that's another, so I appreciate you mentioning that. That's another reason why I wanted to see it discussed among the council body. But unless there's any objection, I think we'll move forward with doing it here at P&S. Great. And on June 23rd, the 13th, right? So 13th of June, the one recommendation I had for the city manager was that we just change the order. This is, of course, all tentative, that we do the data collection privacy policy prior to Coverly, just because it was the last item on the agenda when it was discussed by this committee in December, and I want to make sure it had an earlier time on the agenda for this time. Not to sideline Coverly, but just to make sure that
I'm
item
wondering
got
if we
full
should
attention
actually
needed.
move 1 and 2 to the end and do data collection Coverly.
I'd be okay with that, but I think the only thing I'd say is that if Harriet's okay, we can move those to the end. On the other hand, as Harriet's proven, we can get sometimes through these audits pretty quick and knock them out, and that way Harriet can.
The
move on.
Hydromax audit may take longer.
Gotcha. Okay. If you're okay with moving that towards later in the meeting, I'd be okay with that too.
Or we can just see how many people show up on Coverly and decide.
Okay. And before we wrap up, are there any other items, or any other concerns or thoughts about the tentative future agenda?
So I have a few items that I haven't seen come up. The neighborhood town hall meetings, is that something that we're supposed to be looking at?
Yeah, actually, thank you for mentioning that. I think Tom and I both had interest in discussing that sooner rather than later, so they don't just end up getting stacked at the end of the year. So thanks for mentioning
Exactly.
that.
I'd like to see them spread out a little bit more and not rush to. Also, another one is the Know Your Neighborhood grants. Does that come through policy and services each year, or is that just continued? And I haven't seen it this year.
Tom, do you remember, or does staff remember on that one?
It doesn't come to us. It's
I didn't think so.
program. People just apply.
Oh, don't forget your mic.
But, okay.
It would only come to us if we were going to change it in some way, I think.
Okay, so I think that the council also, Tom's, through the city clerk's office, the Airbnb regulations that had the other method of shortening the time or something disruption. So I wonder if that needs to come to us to discuss in terms of ensuring that Airbnb doesn't go any shorter than the 30 days and that we do have some rules in place. Just to kind of bring it up and make sure.
Yeah, I'd heard actually that at least one council member was potentially looking at a colleague's memo on this, but if it may come to us sooner than that. But I'm fine. I'll check in with staff and see if that's currently something we're planning on discussing either at council or at the committee.
Okay.
And see if that colleague's memo was moving forward.
And then I brought it up multiple times, the again, the progress being made on the Magical Bridge playground. I just think it'd be useful to have them come in, hear about the county money that's available.
Okay. And is that one time sensitive, or do you think we might be able to do that one in late summer or early fall? I'm just looking at our next couple of meetings are getting pretty backed up. That's a good idea. Great. So let's look to maybe scheduling that one in maybe in September.
And I sent a list to Cash today of all of these open audits so that he knows that he's going to need to fit those in somewhere.
Okay, great. All right. Well, with that, this meeting is adjourned.